Friends, comrades, compatriots, I'm Jackie Fox, and I'm not always the most attentive member of my local DSA, but when I do show up, I try to take in some high-level ideas and bring them back to my audience. And this time, I brought back an hour-long lecture on Introduction to Socialism.
There's like a lot of cultural liberalization. You could kind of be whatever. You didn't even have to be a communist. Like the Gosplan, the Supreme Economic Council, mostly staffed by non-Bolsheviks. A shockingly liberal regime for what had basically followed it and would follow it after. Lots of cooperatives. The unionization rates were going up, workers' pay was going up, and again, it's not great. There's like 7 million homeless children during the NEP. It was, again, a madhouse, but things were getting better, and that's kind of important. There's the Schmichka, the Worker-Peasant Alliance. The workers and peasants were to help each other out and grow into communism through the establishment of kind of markets which could be overseen. So kind of an interesting idea. I don't even know if we'd have to do that today if all of a sudden we became a communist economy because we don't have peasants. But it was kind of a neat idea. Some more mid-20s Soviet stuff. And Lenin, his last writings kind of talk about this. The NEP was supposed to last for like decades, and it'd be a slow emergence of economic planning, greater and greater. Lenin, in his last writings, asked that Stalin be removed from his position as general secretary, which is very notable because he was rude. He ended up being a pretty rude guy. But there's also a call for the expansion of cooperatives, worker self-management, which were, again, increasing in this time. Lenin is very, very clear, he returns to this a lot, that the state should not be a party state, but that workers who are literate, which weren't that many, should be invited at every occasion to join the state, permeate the state. He talks constantly about the living blood of the proletariat. He wants the state itself to be a proletarian body more and more, which is very important. Lenin says we don't live in the commune state. It's like, that's an ideal, but we're not in it, unfortunately. He says that we basically live in kind of a holdover of the Tsarist state. He's very clear on that. He's not lying to himself, in other words. And he's very clear about the Schmidt. So here's a good example of kind of NEP period thinking about the state. Felix Dzerzhinsky says we need to cut the red tape. He says no more pork barrel spending in Washington, scribbling the flow of documents in which we are drowning. It is necessary to restructure the work, to wipe out useless bureaucratic units, assign more responsibility to those who are engaged in work. We need to avoid such a bureaucratic system when it is not us who know what we're doing, but pieces of paper in our portfolios. So there was kind of like a hard to imagine in a way, a kind of strange anti-bureaucratic tendency. Dzerzhinsky would be elected to the Supreme Economic Council. He's also the leader of the Cheka, so that's the guy behind all the secret police stuff. And the people in the Supreme Economic Council were mighty afraid. They're like, Felix Dzerzhinsky, this guy is the leader of the secret police, and now he's our boss. And he actually turned out to be the best boss they ever had. He was the best Supreme Economic Council leader because he was extremely patient, was warm, he listened to everybody, and he had a genuine belief of growing into socialism. Another guy that gets kind of a bad rap. He once said that if you were to end the Cheka, which is the secret police, if you wanted to end it, you'd have to kill every Chekist and then abolish the death penalty the next day. So he had a very realistic position on how out of hand the police apparatus had gotten, and he was very bent on kind of curtailing it and bringing it in. He also started a lot of orphanages. Very interesting guy. Lenin again says, nothing is more stupid than the idea of applying coercion in economic relations with the middle peasant. Think about that. The aim is not to expropriate the middle peasant, but to bear in mind the specific conditions in which the peasant lives, to learn from him methods of transition to a better system, learning from the peasantry, and not dare to give orders. That is the rule we have set ourselves. So it's not like the Bolsheviks were anti-peasant or, going out in the countryside and killing peasants. There's a trying to kind of grow into socialism through not coercion, but civil peace. Very important. Okay, so by 1927, you have three camps. You have Bukharin and Trotsky, who are aligned and have been aligned for quite some time, and you have Trotsky in the left opposition. So Bukharin, his primary stance is that we defend the Shmychka, and we defend the new economic policy and grow into socialism as Lenin had said. So slow evolution. Gradual collectivization, which wasn't to be forced, but a gradual and voluntary process, and that we would slowly rebuild Soviet democracy through having free and fair elections, which is mentioned, and is big on institutionalism and legality. Within his camp are also Mikhail Tomsky, leader of the trade unions, extremely popular, representative of the workers, and Alexei Rykov, who was a peasant and had mostly the interests of the peasants in mind. So Bukharin kind of is holding together peasantry and the workers and trying to kind of create a deal that would evolve into socialism. Trotsky is mostly about the workers. Peasants can get fucked, and that's kind of his thing. We tax them and tax them and tax them until we have enough money to industrialize extremely rapidly, and then basically ingratiate all the peasants into the industrial sector, and then technify agriculture. And he also is big on rebuilding Soviet democracy and destroying the bureaucratic apparatus that was existing. He's big into internationalism, idea of permanent revolution, and so on. This is the left opposition. And Stalin, who's aligned with Bukharin, because Stalin was never a decent theorist, and he basically only had the organizational power. Stalin basically represented the bureaucracy in a lot of ways, and represented the party bureaucracy as such. He aligns with Bukharin, but then when the left opposition is kicked out, and Trotsky is exiled, the first thing Stalin does is basically looks at the field and says, "I've got more guys on the field than Bukharin does. We're gonna do my thing." And most people are pretty down with that, oddly enough. There was a massive grain requisition crisis in 1928 that happened recurringly, and a lot of people were going hungry, and Bukharin saying, "We need to be patient and kind of slowly adjust our system and get you food," and Stalin saying, "I can give you food now, but you gotta do what I'm doing." And most people were down with that, a lot of people were, and Stalin gets a majority of the Politburo and he starts doing it. However, immediately after Stalin's kind of monopoly of power, he very, very quickly ratchets up the quotas on industrial production. Collectivization goes from voluntary and gradual to voluntary and quick to not voluntary and very, very quick at the barrel of a gun. Stalin personally oversees grain requisition in the Urals, I think, and that was supposed to be an exception. It turned out to be the rule. And a lot of the people in the party well into the 1930s were absolutely horrified that they had stuck with Stalin, and many of them tried desperately to moderate him. Kirov being a great example, who was massacred in the street alley by a random robber, which is highly fucking doubtable. So yeah, Stalin wins, collectivization, very quick. Inept destroyed, famine and collectivization basically are hand in hand. Breakneck industrialization for the 5-year plan, which again, the 5-year plan was like very harebrained. It was extremely quickly put together. The quotas were constantly being jacked up. It was basically impossible. The police apparatus was totally unleashed. The idea of party democracy began to wither away quite quickly. And yeah, economic planning was, again, harebrained. A lot of specialists were not properly consulted, and the results reflect that, and so on. So here's Lenin's initial cabinet. very few ended up remaining. Kollontai didn't go missing. I think this was like a Trotskyist thing, so I think it's a little bit off, but Kollontai actually just became an ambassador and learned how to be very, very quiet about her position on the Soviet Union. But everybody else, by 1938, was put in the ground in various ways. Most were jailed and then shot. So there you go. This was mostly done so that nobody within the ruling apparatus would remember. It's actually very creepy when you think about it, but if you kill enough people, no one will remember what happened before, and that's basically what Stalin was banking on. Take the new educated peasants that were coming out of the 20s, put them in positions, and then if you rewrite history, they'll think it's always kind of been like this. And so the Soviet 1920s were all but forgotten for a lot of Soviet citizens and party members. It's really, really, really tragic. Okay, and then the Stalinist model becomes, it basically is astroturfed, so that the way the Bolsheviks did things were kind of discarded for a new historical model, which would become the model for every communist revolution afterwards. Obviously, a lot of nuance and differences with China, Vietnam, the DPRK, Cuba. Most of the kind of anti-colonial revolutions in Africa and the Middle East kind of followed roughly the kind of Stalinist model. Party dictatorship, collectivization was big. Not really much of a focus on worker ownership or worker democracy. Economic planning was always a little bit haphazard. And this is the same goes for Eastern Europe, largely. So it basically put a kind of a nail in a lot of what we stand for as socialists. Who else better to hear it from than Yuri Andropov, penultimate leader of the Soviet Union, unless you're counting that bastard, what's his name? The last guy. Not Gorbachev, he's like, okay, Yeltsin. What a piece of shit. Okay. Despite the socialization of the means of production, the workers are not the real bosses of state property. They did obtain that. They never actually had become its bosses. So who are the bosses in the USSR? All those who, with a camouflage privatism, refuse to convert mine into ours and want to live off the backs of others, on the backs of society. So that's the kind of result of all this. Victor Serge, very important anarchist turned Bolshevik, says, "It is often said that the germ of Stalinism was always in Bolshevism at the beginning. Well, I have no objection. Only Bolshevism also contained many other germs, a mass of other germs, and those who lived through the enthusiasm of the first years of the victorious social revolution ought not to forget it. To judge a living man by the death germs which the autopsy reveals in the corpse, and which he may have carried in him since his birth, is that very sensible? No, it's not." And to kind of wrap this thing up, capitalism is going through a continuous crisis. You just kind of have to pay attention to the news to see that there's a lot of extreme nonsense going on, and it all comes back down to the profit motive, the fact that there's not genuine working class democracy and so on. And we can learn a lot from Marx and the early Soviet Union. These things, Marx, still good. So on and so on. This is kind of my part. For the socialist imperative today has to be genuinely democratic, has to bring the commanding heights of the economy into rationalized state control through cybernetic planning, and we encourage democratization of workplaces through worker cooperatives, municipal ownership, unionization, and so on. And that if we keep doing these things and do them well in a way that genuinely benefit people's lives, we can slowly grow into communism and avoid all of the kind of militaristic elements of the Soviet Union. And this is something that Bukharin mentioned about planning in response to Stalin. Centralization has its limits and is necessary to give subordinate agencies a certain independence. They should be independent and responsible within prescribed limits. Directives from the center should be confined to formulating the task of general terms. The specific working out of business is the business of lower agencies, which act in accordance with the actual conditions of life. So, yes, what I think socialism should look like, definitely a conscious reduction of waste and consumer choice. This is like a big libertarian thing. Capitalism is great because we have all these choices. Actually, I think socialism would be great if we could reduce some of these fucking choices. Not all of them are necessary to produce a massive amount of waste in our economy, in competition where there should be cooperation. And our goal should not be private luxury, but public luxury for the fulfillment of each of us within our community, within travel, art, leisure, and so on. Civil society and the state have to be transcended through reflexive permeation and cooperation. No rights without duties, no duties without rights. I think the Cuban state is actually probably the best model of a social state that we have. And they kind of have attempted a similar thing of permeability, reduction of the work week, and the necessity for labor to material reproduce itself through automation and so on. There's that famous Marx quote about, is it the one about dancing and shit? Yeah. Where you should dance and drink more, basically. And here's like a reading list of them. Alright. Does anyone have any questions or anything?
Fox Talks.